former ambassador to Qatar, the U.S. ambassador to Qatar, 1995 to 1998. That was in the Clinton administration. He was a career officer, and he's now a strategic advisor to the Gulf International Forum, which is a new think tank based in Washington, D.C. Ambassador, great to have you, sir.
It's good to be on again.
All right, so I got to tell you,
Happy Armistice Day. I'm old enough to remember it that way.
Wow, happy Armistice Day. That's right, and happy Veterans Day.
Yeah.
And Mr. Ambassador, I learned so much when you're on. Let's get to the Khashoggi affair. I find this horrific event. Now we find out there's a tape, right? Now, we knew there was a tape because Gina Haspel, the CIA director, went to Istanbul, and we kind of heard she had a tape, and she told the president what happened. Now the tape leaks out. Apparently they strangled Khashoggi when he got in there. Apparently they put a bag over his head. You can hear him on the tape, which Erdogan says of a Turkey, their president says they're going to release today, saying that they could hear him gasping for air and telling them to take the bag off his head. He couldn't breathe. Then he suffocated, which is a horrible way to die, very painful, with a bag over your head. And then they chopped him up and put him in acid. My heavens, what do you make of this whole thing?
Again, I wish that the Saudi, I don't wish them any more, but at least they should have consulted with the mafia on how to kill somebody. This is just howling incompetence. And then there's a certain brutality, all this. And there's but I don't understand, frankly, what they were trying to accomplish. If you're sending a message to somebody, you're supposed to do it in public. If you're not sending a message to somebody, then you do it sort of clean and neat, and no one notices. But this is neither. It is both brutal, but for a country, in addition to being brutal, it was a horrifically incompetent way of doing it.
Let me ask you something, Mr. Ambassador. So, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was on the phone with the president, and the way we understand the readout is from the readout, the official readout of the conversation from the White House, was that MBS told the president that he was not aware of this, that it was rogue, and that there were 18 people involved, but he was not directing it, he didn't know anything of it, he didn't authorize it. Don't you find that almost astonishingly impossible to believe?
Yes. It's a little bit like buying a bridge in Brooklyn. But, there's no way they could have mobilized this much in the way of resources. This is 2 aircraft, senior people from the Saudi intelligence service. The only, unless the guy in charge went totally bananas at the last minute and decided to kill him, but there was no reason. And these guys presumably are all professionals. Presumably they know what they were doing. So even if Mohammed bin Salman had played the old Henry II game, won't someone rid me of this troublesome priest? These are not the kinds of people who do that. Mm-hmm. These are professionals who presumably would do this.
Well, you had 18 people.
It just boggles the mind.
Yeah. So look, it's inconceivable to anybody that follows any of this that MBS was not either involved in it, gave the order, directed the order, or managed it. The way they changed his story 15 times, even up to how he died. They said he was strangled. Now we find out they put a bag over his head and tightened it. It's just, the stuff is beyond the pale. And think of what the Saudis have said here. Basically, these are 18 rogue people that hijacked a Saudi plane, came to the embassy, came to Istanbul, had no authorization on it. And what did they do? Go to the local Istanbul Walmart and say, hey, I need 2 barrels of acid that can dissolve our body. And, oh, by the way, I see you have a special over there on chainsaws. Can they cut through human bone? Let me have 3 of those. It's inconceivable to me that he didn't know. So,
and they had access to official premises.
Right.
And they had, both the consulate and the consul general's home, the garden. And they had somebody who sort of looked like Khashoggi and put his clothes on, except he forgot the shoes. Mm-hmm. And it just makes no sense.
So if he was on the phone and he told the President of the United States that he had no involvement in this, then you have the prospect, Mr. Ambassador, that MBS lied to the President of the United States on the phone. I mean, that's problematic. I mean, from that position as a former ambassador, I mean, how do you get past that?
It's really hard. I mean, there's two problems here. First of all, one thing that all good diplomats learned a long time ago is you can refuse to provide information, you can put a good spin on information, but you can never lie. Because once you lie and are caught out in a lie, your future credibility is zero, and so is that of your country. And the truly dangerous thing here is, for better or for worse, the administration had chosen Mohammed bin Salman and Saudi Arabia as the base upon which to manage their two most important issues in the Middle East. One is the confrontation with Iran, and the other was trying a grand plan to settle the Israel-Palestinian issue. I mean, both of which, legitimate foreign policy objectives. But they based everything on the ability of the Saudis to organize an alliance against Iran, and on the ability of the Saudis to give religious cover to any agreement that the Palestinians wouldn't like that might be imposed on them. And now that's gone. And I don't know what you do next.
That's why I wanted to get your take on this. I don't know where they go from here because their credibility is shot, certainly with MBS. The second thing is the level of incompetence of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is frighteningly shocking. I mean, quite frankly, Mr. Ambassador, everything, and I'm just telling it like it is here, everything that MBS has touched has turned into a disaster, starting with the Yemeni civil war, which he spent billions of dollars more than the Iranians, and children are starving. It's a horrible situation. If he took that money and just gave it to the people and built roads and schools, there'd be no Houthis. They'd have been driven out. So he botched that thing. He completely screwed up the embargo on the state of Qatar, as you know, because that blew up in his face. The state of Qatar is better off since the embargo than before the embargo. That's cost the Saudis money. Now they want to build some kind of a moat. That's billions of dollars they don't have. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, I can go on and on and on. Like everything the guy does is just turns into crap. And so he's got the reverse Midas touch. So this is just reality. So with the administration putting this much stake in the guy, 33 years old, where do they go from here, Mr. Ambassador?
The problem, of course, is that they put it on the guy rather than the country.
Right.
This is a mistake we've made in the past with other countries. We tend to equate the leadership of that country with that country's long-term interest. We do it less with the democratic countries because we know that the guy's going to move on. But in dictatorships, we frequently, and it's this administration and previous administrations as well, we frequently fool ourselves into thinking the dictator is going to be there forever, therefore we can count on him. And this is probably the single biggest reason you've got to be very careful dealing with dictators, because they're not there forever, but you fall into the trap of thinking they are. I mean, the best thing that could happen to the administration right now would be an internal change in Saudi Arabia that removes Mohammed bin Salman from power.
Right.
If he stays in, and I think right now the chances are he will stay in, because to leave would be, very risky, personally. If he stays in, he's going to be working overtime, simply trying to stay in power.
Right.
Simply, trying to manage things. He's going to be, in some ways, his power is going to be so undermined, so cut. The ability of the state to function internationally has been cut back dramatically. His closest ally, which is the Emirates, have gone, totally off the screen. I mean, just total radio silence out of Abu Dhabi. They're not involved at all with this one, and they are pursuing contradictory policies in Yemen, different than the policies that contradict the interests of Saudi Arabia. So if those continue to be the two principal objectives of the current administration, of the Trump administration, then their choices, they've either got to find somebody else to be their principal ally in the region, and there are no good candidates for that job. Though I do think Erdogan is trying to build himself up into that category, except Erdogan's interests with both Iran and the Israeli-Palestinian issue are not the same as Saudi Arabia's. So I think Erdogan's trying to play himself into that role.
Hasn't he done a masterful job, though, at manipulating this information the way he's dribbled it out to the media?
Unbelievable. A Saudi friend of mine said that Mohammed, somebody who's not on good terms with the regime, said that Mohammed Salman just handed Erdogan the conductor's baton, and Erdogan played it brilliantly. He has orchestrated, the choreography is beyond belief.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very impressive. And you look at some of what Erdogan has did to get the power and how he's held power and his management. I'm not going to call it manipulation because it really isn't that. It's management. His authentic, real management of international and U.S. media has been nothing short of brilliant in this affair.
And I wish Erdogan's interests coincided with ours.
Right.
Unfortunately, they don't. Right. That's the problem. But now we have this master conductor in the region whose interests do not coincide with our interests, and matter of fact, overlap in very few places.
We're with former U.S. Ambassador to Qatar, Patrick Theros. He was there from 95 to 98. Under the Clinton administration, he was a career officer, and he's now a strategic advisor to the new D.C. think tank, the Gulf International Forum. Mr. Ambassador, you mentioned MBZ from the Emirates, which was interesting. I'm watching how MBZ plays it now. I feel that MBZ is older, smarter, wiser than his 33-year-old counterpart in Saudi Arabia. And it's fascinating how he has completely backed away from any association with MBS or the Saudis. I think the term you used was radio silence. What is his strategy here?
Well, you've got to go back to basics. The Emirates and Saudi Arabia are not natural allies. Saudi Arabia has for years, it doesn't matter who the ruler is, tried to exert control over the small states of the Gulf, over Bahrain, which they've accomplished, over Qatar, Kuwait, the Emirates, and Oman.
Right.
And this has been a long-term Saudi objective. What Mohammed bin Zayed has built up the Emirates so that militarily they are a very significant force. And I believe it's reasonable to say that he is playing this so that he could neutralize what he sees as a Saudi threat to the Emirates, a long-term Saudi threat to the Emirates, by co-opting Mohammed bin Salman. Meanwhile, he pursues other objectives that strategically place him in a stronger position. If he can control South Yemen, for example, Aden in that area, he is then in a position to challenge the Saudis in the Red Sea. If he can, the more you feed the Saudi military into Yemen and it gets chewed up, or just humiliated and so forth, morale goes down. The stronger he is to resist. By removing Qatar, he was trying to remove Qatar from the equation because he didn't want any particular rivals in the Gulf. But in the long run, I believe that the long-term strategic interests of the Emirates are to defend themselves against what they see as Saudi hegemony, Saudi expansionism. So this is all part of that game, and he's been playing it well, though I don't think he counted on just how badly the Saudis would muck up this alliance.
Well, he's got to be just sitting there appalled by this whole thing, and that's why he hasn't said a word. He's just trying to back away. Now, I've got 2 minutes, Mr. Ambassador. I want to get to the Trump administration. If you were advising them now on how to proceed, what would it be?
I would set a short-term goal, which is stop the war in Yemen. This is a huge embarrassment for the United States internationally. It is pointless because all we are doing is weakening the strategic position and the military strength of the Saudis. And if stopping the war in Yemen costs Mohammed bin Salman power or influence, that's a price worth paying, because I think that's what I would do in the short term. Long term, it's really hard to figure out. You've got to go back and re-examine your long-term objectives. Does he really have a final plan for the Palestinian-Israeli issue? If he does, go back and examine it and see if there's some other way to push it, because I don't know what it is. But as I say, the short term, what I would be doing in the short term right now is telling the Saudis, war's over, go home. Mm-hmm. If you really want to prevent the Iranians from having influence in Yemen, just go home. Mm-hmm. The Yemenis don't like the Iranians any more than they like the Saudis.
Mm-hmm. And if the administration does that, they can then say that they have reacted to the Khashoggi affair
right.
by a major change in policy. And I think what the president has said is, look, I'm not going to jeopardize the arms deal of $110 billion, although I want to make everybody understand it's not a deal. It's no money. $15 billion has changed hands. It's a memorandum of understanding that could get canceled at any time. Mm-hmm. So just so everybody knows that. But he said, look, they'll just buy it from the Russians or the Chinese. But I think what everybody is looking for is what the Trump administration is going to do. And I think having a major change in policy in that civil war, I think, would at least be a step in the right direction. And then they can say, look, here's how we reacted to it, right?
Right. I mean, yes, then they would be back in control of the situation, because right now the situation has completely escaped their control.
Exactly.
I used to complain about Obama dithering in Syria. Now I'm complaining about Trump dithering with Saudi Arabia.
Right. Mr. Ambassador Patrick Theros, we're out of time. Thanks for joining the John Fredericks Radio Network. We'll see you next week. Always great analysis. Patrick Theros, the strategic advisor